There is a place in the Caribbean where the water runs so clear you can see 40 feet down before the reef even begins to pull your eyes deeper. Where the jungle meets the shoreline in a tangle of green so thick, it looks like the island is trying to keep its secrets. That place is Roatan, a slender crescent of land sitting off the northern coast of Honduras, cradled by the second largest barrier reef system on the planet. And while most visitors arrive with snorkel masks and sunscreen, Suzi arrived with a wetsuit, a dive tank, and an obsession with the stories buried beneath the surface. Because Roatan is not just a diving destination. It is a living museum, and every layer of water hides another chapter of a history that is as turbulent as the Atlantic storms that once battered its shores. The island stretches roughly 48 miles long and no more than 5 miles wide at its broadest point. Yet within that narrow ribbon of land and surrounding sea, centuries of conquest, piracy, colonization, and resilience have left their mark. Suzi had read about Roatan for years before she finally booked her flight. She had studied the maps, traced the reef lines with her finger on glossy dive magazines, and listened to every podcast she could find about the Bay Islands of Honduras. But nothing quite prepares you for the moment the plane descends, and the Caribbean opens up beneath you in every shade of blue imaginable, from the pale turquoise of the shallows to the deep indigo of the open ocean trench just offshore. Long before Spanish galleons appeared on the horizon, Roatan was home to the Paya people, an indigenous group who had lived on these islands for thousands of years. They were skilled fishermen and navigators, deeply connected to the sea in ways that would have made any modern scuba diver envious. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Paya had established communities across the Bay Islands well before European contact, building their lives around the abundant marine resources that the reef provided. When Suzi descended on her first dive of the trip, dropping slowly through the warm water column toward the reef wall at Mary's Place, she thought about those early inhabitants. What did they see when they looked into this same water? They had no tanks, no regulators, no buoyancy compensators, yet they understood this underwater world in ways that took modern science centuries to rediscover. The Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, and with them came the catastrophic disruption that colonization always brings. Christopher Columbus himself sailed past the Bay Islands during his fourth voyage in 1502, making contact with indigenous peoples along the coast of Central America. Within decades, the Spanish had enslaved much of the indigenous population, forcing them to work in mines on the mainland. The Paya of Roatan were largely decimated, their population shattered by disease, forced labor, and violence. The island was left nearly depopulated, a ghost of its former self, sitting quietly in the Caribbean sun, while empires argued over who had the right to claim it. Into that vacuum sailed some of history's most colorful and dangerous characters. Roatan became a haven for pirates and privateers throughout the 1600s and 1700s, its deep natural harbors and dense jungle cover, making it the perfect base of operations for those who made their living raiding Spanish treasure fleets. Port Royal, located on the eastern end of the island, became one of the most notorious pirate strongholds in the Caribbean. Names like Henry Morgan and John Coxon are woven into the island's folklore, men who used Roatan as a staging ground for raids that sent shockwaves through the colonial economy of the entire region. Suzi had done her homework on this chapter of the island's history, and she found herself grinning behind her regulator as she drifted past the anchor of a sunken vessel, its iron encrusted with coral and draped in sea fans. Somewhere in the waters around this island, the remnants of that pirate era still rest on the seafloor, waiting for the right diver to find them. Britain and Spain fought over Roatan repeatedly throughout the 1700s, each power recognizing the island's strategic value as a naval base and trading post. The British established settlements, built fortifications, and brought enslaved Africans to the island, adding yet another layer to its complex cultural tapestry. Perhaps the most remarkable chapter in Roatan's history is the arrival of the Garifuna people in 1797. The Garifuna are a unique cultural group descended from indigenous Arawak and Carib peoples of the Lesser Antilles, who intermarried with enslaved Africans over generations on the island of St. Vincent. When the British defeated the Garifuna in the Second Carib War, they forcibly exiled the entire population, loading thousands of people onto ships and depositing them on the shores of Roatan. From that brutal beginning, the Garifuna built something extraordinary. They spread along the Caribbean coast of Central America, establishing communities in Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. Their language, music, food, and spiritual traditions survived colonization, exile, and marginalization to become one of the most vibrant living cultures in the Americas. The United Nations recognized Garifuna language, dance, and music as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2001. When Suzi surfaced from her afternoon dive and walked through the Garifuna community of Punta Gorda, the oldest Garifuna settlement in Honduras, she felt the weight of that history in every drumbeat drifting from an open doorway. Children played in the street, elders sat in the shade, and the smell of hudut, a traditional Garifuna fish stew made with coconut milk and mashed plantain, floated through the warm evening air. This island had survived everything history threw at it, and its people carried that survival in their bones. Roatan is not just a place you visit. It is a place that stays with you, long after the saltwater dries and the dive logs are filled.